Renuncia a ser solo un espectador y conviértete en otro jugador en caliente.mx. Cientos de deportes durante todo el año y los mejores eventos en vivo. Descarga la app, regístrate y obtén 400 pesos de regalo. Caliente.mx. Más acción, más diversión.
Estamos de regreso, les recordamos el hashtag para que se comuniquen con nosotros, Summit Liga MX. Estamos recibiendo sus comentarios, por supuesto sus preguntas en caso que las tengan. Jorge, continuamos con este segundo día de actividades, el cual todavía tiene mucho por contar.
Otro tema apasionante, Ana Katy. Transformar la percepción del fútbol femenil no ha sido sencillo, pero el fenómeno se disparó en los últimos años. Vamos a conocer más de cómo se está dando todo este cambio.
Greetings to everyone in the studio. Thank you very much for allowing us to be part of the second edition of the Summit Liga MX. I would like to thank Liga MX for allowing us to be part of this summit today, and welcome to the Driving the Change panel. My name's Emma Sykes, currently UEFA's Senior Development Manager for Women's Football, with over 10 years of experience in the European game. And I'm really, really excited to be able to introduce to you today our two panelists, two experts of the football industry, Paul Barber and Sophie Sauvage. Paul has been the CEO of Brighton and Hove Albion in England since 2012, taking the men's team to the Premier League in 2017 and ensuring that the women's team secured promotion to the WSL in 2018. Paul's career has spanned 25 years of professional football, working in the Vancouver Whitecaps, Tottenham Hotspur, and the England Football Association. Welcome to you, Paul. It's great to have you on the panel with us today.
Thank you.
And we also have Sophie Sauvage, started her career working in the sports business sector of Deloitte. Sophie is a merger and acquisition specialist and has been leading the NWSL project for the European club Olympique Lyonnais in negotiating the merger between Reign FC and OL as part of a deal that was completed in 2020. Sophie now represents OL on the NWSL board and is working on the strategic project to bring back OL Reign to Seattle. So welcome to you to Sophie.
Thank you.
So a lot been happening in the women's game. I think it's on a really high trajectory in the past years. And I'd love to just start with some opening remarks from both of you. If we could start with you, maybe, Sophie, you describe yourself as having a unique view of women's football. So how do you assess the global developments of women's football over the past few years?
Well, there has been a huge trend visible for everyone over the last 4 or 5 years. And I think the 2019 World Cup brought that to the face of the world, obviously. But it means that people started to work on it and to invest in it before 2019. And so it's at the level of clubs, at the level of the institutions, at the level of the players who are 365 days professional as athletes. They are not just shining during the competitions, they are shining every day. And so there is this growing wave and there are assessing points that are clear. I mean, the attendance, the viewership for the events, attendance, when I talk about attendance, it's not just the big competitions, it's also in league games. We see across the world that records are broken season after season. More and more people come to the game. And so with the effort of the investments, you improve the product and you give the opportunity to the athletes to be at their best. And even if there is a lot to do to be for the future, I think that there is a proof of concept now. If people were still doubting about the women's game, I think they should not, because the proof has been made that it's attractive, that there is interested broadcasters, there are interested sponsors, and there is a business model that is now possible with the women's game. And so that's how I would assess the development of the women's game.
Yeah, I think that in the last few weeks, especially, it has been a bit of a wave of record after record. I don't think that we can kind of escape the headlines, which is fantastic. And later in the panel, I really want to discuss with you that whole idea of now there being a proof of concept. Paul, how do you see the global development from an English perspective, and who do you think is driving the change?
Well, first of all, I think there's been a huge amount of growth in the last sort of few years, in particular in England. The Women's Super League now has got a credibility with audiences, not just live in the stadium where attendances are still small but growing, but also on broadcast exposure. We're getting good numbers viewing Women's Super League games now in England, which is really good. There's still a long way to go from a business model point of view here. There's a significant amount of investment being made, not least by our club and a number of others in the Women's Super League, but a return on that investment is still some way away. So it's going to require patience, faith, confidence from owners of football clubs in England who are participating in the women's game. But as the exposure increases and as more and more interest in the game grows, then I think we've got a good chance of seeing a return at some point in the future on that investment. But regardless of that, it's the right thing to do. Half the world's population are female. Football is a game for everyone. It's absolutely right and proper that we provide pathways for young girls to play the game as much as young boys. And it's absolutely right that women and girls are welcome at our matches, whether it's men's or women's matches, and feel part of the game. So from our point of view, it's as much the right thing to do as it is an investment in our business. But it's also, I think, a great opportunity for growing the audience of football worldwide. And that's why we're involved in the game. And I know a number of my colleagues at Premier League clubs in England are seeing it the same way.
You both have kind of mentioned it being about that right thing to do, and it's on the right trajectory, and the fact that it's a sport for both genders, whether it's at grassroots level or whether it's in the professional game. I wanted to ask you very much about the leagues that you're involved in, because I think that we all see the WSL and the NWSL, which have both now been around for about 10 years. As being the real kind of leaders of domestic competitions for women's football, and that have been through huge change and huge investment, but both clubs have kind of decided to get on board because of those leagues. And I wanted to really understand, what was the conscious decision, Paul, to make that extra investment to be part of the Women's Super League, which was essentially the first professional league in Europe?
Well, it was a very big decision for our club, and our board took a long time debating it, because we have a general philosophy at our club that if we're going to be involved in something, if we're going to do something, then we're going to do it properly and we're going to do it well. And I think that was never more true than the decision to commit to progressing to the Women's Super League and trying to get that promotion, because it was going to require a lot more investment. Inevitably, that investment has to come from somewhere. And, the question of whether it was going to take away from our investment in men's football, or whether it was going to actually add to the value of our brand in terms of both men's football and women's football, that was a big decision. But we, again, coming back to the point I made just now, we felt it was absolutely the right thing to do. We feel that it's an important area of growth for the game. We feel that it will actually help grow audiences, not just for the women's game, but also for the men's game. And we're already beginning to see people that have watched our team play in the Women's Super League are now actually migrating across to watch our men's team play, having not done so previously. So there's some real benefits to actually being leading, I suppose, in terms of investment in women's football. And we feel that it was absolutely the right decision. But a return on the investment we've made is a way away, and we accept that. But we're excited about the future. We're excited about the progress that we've made so far. We've invested here at the training ground in specific facilities for our women and girls teams. And already that has started to enhance the performance levels that we're seeing in our competitive games. So far, so good. We've got a way to go, but it's an enjoyable journey that we're on.
Yeah, very much so. And one that's going to continue after this season, right into the Women's Euro. You're also a host for that competition. Is that also part of your strategy to promote the women's game?
Very much so. We've got a great relationship with UEFA, with the FA here in England. We're very keen to showcase our facilities and to have them used for as much as possible for football. The opportunity to stage games for the Women's European Championships was a natural thing for us to want to be involved in. Certainly with my past working for the FA, I'm always very keen to stage international matches. I know just how fantastic they are for the profile of our club, but more importantly, the growth of the game. And, you know, the Women's European Championships coming to Brighton is something we're very much looking forward to.
Me too. I'm also very excited to come into some of those games. I know that you also host England, so that should, and the quarterfinals, so that should be excellent. Sophie, I just wanted to pick up on something that kind of Paul said around profile of the game and how that's growing, and link that to the decision of Olympique Lyonnais to make that bold decision to become part of the NWSL. My understanding is it's a first of its kind partnership in the women's game. So I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about that rationale of the OL group to invest and kind of form another team in a different league.
Yes, sure. I mean, first I want to recall that the investment of OL in the women's game has been for almost 20 years, and the starting point was the belief from our president Jean-Michel Aulas that football is for everyone. So as Paul said, boys, girls, men, women, there is no limit to the sport. It's for everyone, and whatever gender, doesn't matter. It's really a sport for all. So when we've been very successful with the women's team in Lyon, and the opportunity and the reflection of the NWSL came when we started to think about how to internationalize our brand. And so it was like in 2018 that a couple of things came together. We had a project of investing in a basketball team owned by Tony Parker in Lyon. And we also had a project to work with Tony as an ambassador for our brand. And we were seeing what was happening with the World Cup to come in France in 2019. So there was a combination of internationalization of the brand, our strength in women's football, the United States country of women's soccer, we can say that, I think. Tony Parker in the picture. So we thought that investing in the NWSL was a good opportunity to make our strategy concrete with being in the United States, with what we do well is running a women's team. And it went fast, actually, probably more fast than what we thought at the beginning, because it took like 6 months to find an agreement with the Reign FC. And so we finalized the acquisition early 2020. So the first 2 years have been a little bit hard. I mean, of course, COVID hit everybody on Earth, so it was our first year there. And in the second year, we've had some kind of earthquake in the NWSL with a scandal of abuses, multiple abuses, which I think has, this has impacted us a lot, all of us. And the transformation engaged in the NWSL is a big one, recognizing the systemic issue of abuses and rebuilding the trust with the players, and really all the owners and our new commissioner and former one wants to work to make this organization a role model organization, as our players are role models. We want to be a role model organization with a very good culture, and so that's a key point. So when we come back to our investment in the NWSL, as you know, it's a closed league, and so it brings a different kind of interest for the investors, because you have the franchise value, and we see in all sports in the US that there is a growing trend. And indeed, the NWSL, we've seen over the last 2 years that 4 teams have new owners, 2 because the MLS clubs they are tied to were acquired by new owners, and 2 teams were acquired really by new owners, including us. And there are 4 new teams, including Kansas City, Louisville, San Diego, and Angel City. And 3 other teams have new owners coming in. So, there is a growing trend of investment in the league, and I think Jean-Michel was again visionary in making the decision to go for it in 2019.
Jean-Michel Aulas is most certainly a visionary across football, I think, in men's and women's football. And I didn't realize that there was such a new chapter and a wave of change in the NWSL in the last few years in terms of the teams and the ownership. But I think we've seen all across Europe the videos from LA and Angel City FC, which I think have really brought the NWS, back a little bit on the map in recent weeks. Paul, quickly, I would just like to bring you into that conversation, because you've just launched your new 2-year strategy, and I was wondering if there was anything that you had been looking across the Atlantic, taken any inspiration from them, and also if you could just give us a bit of an update on where you see your club going in the future with its women's team.
Yeah, I spent 3 years working in North America when I was with Vancouver, and I was fascinated by just the sheer numbers of people that were turning out to watch the women's game, even then, back in 2009, 2010, 2011. And of course, North American women's football, women's soccer has been through some pretty big roller coasters over the years of growth, and then, disappointment and financial frustration. So, that cycle obviously now hopefully is broken, and there's growth on the horizon. And I think the growth of the game worldwide will help all the leagues ultimately. Here, we're very much focused on becoming a top 4 women's Super League club, which is a very, very big stretch for us. It's a vision that we see as a long-term vision. It's going to require us to develop young players of our own. It's going to require us to consistently perform in the Women's Super League. It's going to need us to compete against much bigger clubs like Olympique Lyonnais and Manchester City and Chelsea and Barcelona and Arsenal, ultimately, if we want to reach the heights of women's football. But again, we're at the start, relatively speaking, of what we consider to be a long journey. And one that we're very committed to, and one that our strategy is designed to embrace. And it's for us, it's about being in the game for the long-term growth overall, but also ultimately for our club to succeed at every level. And I think, we want to serve as an inspiration to young girls. We want to draw more young girls into the game. We want to draw more women and girls to support the game. And again, it supports our overall policy of equality, diversity and inclusion as much as it does a sporting success that we're aiming at. So it's a very important part of the club's strategy. And as I said earlier, we're very much committed. We're delighted to be part of it. We've significantly invested in bricks and mortar now as well here, which is, I think, another big step. Very few clubs in England have yet made the commitment to building training centres specifically designed for women and girls, even to the extent that the gym that we have equipped here for the women and girls is quite different in specification to the gyms we have for the men's and boys teams. Again, just reflecting that gender diversity and the different levels of strength and requirements for female athletes. And I think that level of detail is really important because it shows two things. First of all, it shows a level of respect for female athletes, which I think is really important. And secondly, I think it underlines the commitment that we're making, that we're serious about this, and that we also understand that we're at the start of the journey, not anywhere near the middle or the end. And it's going to take some time for us to fulfill our ambitions of being a top 4 women's Super League club. But it's a long-term aim, and it's something we're very committed to.
There's lots of owners and board members of clubs in Mexico on the call today. What would you be saying to them about the return on investment and their business angle? Obviously, you've just said, you want to be in it. It's part of your overall strategy, also linked to equality and the wider prospects of the game. But for those that are really kind of wondering, when does the return on investment come? How are you managing those sorts of conversations at board level if they are happening?
Well, I think it's first of all important to set the owner's expectation at a reasonable level, because certainly in England, those returns are not going to come very soon. In fact, probably not for some time to come. But you can measure returns in lots of different ways. Financial returns are one thing, but return on the investment in the brand is quite another. And we're already seeing a value to the investment we've made in women and girls football, just in terms of our brand awareness, in terms of the way our community and the wider football community sees our club. We're seeing a return in terms of our staff admiring our commitment to women and girls football. So we're improving staff morale at different areas. And of course, in the local economy, we're creating new jobs and we're creating new opportunities for young people and people who want to live and work in this city, but work in this sport. So I think you can measure returns in lots of different ways, but whatever way you look at it, there's going to be a need for patience. There's going to be a need for a long-term outlook and a long-term vision, just as Olympique Lyonnais owner has for the women's game and for the value that it can bring to their club. We see it exactly the same. So we are arguing for patience from our board. Fortunately, we've got directors here, an owner here who looks at the long term, believes in the long term. And so for me, the biggest single message is just to be patient and to look at the wider returns on the investment you make rather than just the pure financial returns.
Yeah. No, very true. Patience seems to have been what most of the women's football community have been doing for quite some time, and now it very much feels like everybody all of a sudden wants to be part of it. But echoing what Sophie kind of said at the very, very beginning, clubs like Olympique Lyonnais have been in this sport for 20 years, and now we're really seeing that globalization, let's say, of women's football. Sophie, I want to ask a similar question that I just asked to Paul about, I guess, the business case and the value of women's football beyond just financial returns. So the two business models in Europe and America differ, so you might have also different expectations from both sides of the Atlantic, but how specifically is OL Reign determining that value to its kind of shareholders, partners and fans?
Yeah, I mean, Paul said it very well. It's about value and values, actually. What it brings to the brand. How do we measure that? I'm not really sure in terms of financials, but I'm sure that it brings a lot to the brand to be invested in this way in the women's game. And same with the academy, because as Brighton, we do have an academy, and we have already a couple of players playing in our team. I mean, it's been 4 years, because Wendy came at 16, and we have then Anna Majri, Selma Basha, and Melvin Malar, Emeline Laurent coming from, and many others coming from the academy into the game. So that, you know, that's just fantastic to have these young girls coming in the academy and then being able to be part of the pro team, and then for some of them of the national team. So that's a big value, actually, because it creates the path for young girls. They can see what happens if you have a dream and if you commit to the efforts that requires the professionalism, you can do it. And there are more and more proof of that in Europe. So that's, I think, a big value. In the NWSL, what we are learning is, you know, half of the clubs are not tied to men's teams. So we've seen major investment in front office with business model to be entirely developed on the women's team. So it's not, I mean, in Europe, we know that the men's football finance widely the women's football. But when you have only a women's team, you have to build the model on the women's team. So we see like bold moves, like 50, 60 people in the front office of some clubs to go for sponsorship, to work on the ticketing side, and all that tied to the project to be impactful in the community. So everybody has seen what Angel City has done. I mean, they have 16,000 season ticket holder. That's brilliant. They announced that they signed for 35 million in sponsorship.
Okay.
So, I mean, that's inspiring too. Even for us, you know, we've been in the game for 20 years. And when I said we learn from the US, yeah, we do learn from this bold approach to have a women's team and to decide that, yes, we will build a model on the women's team and it will work. So I think there are reasons to believe that at some point, the reward will be there, including the financial one. And so in terms of investment in the NWSL, we've seen that the value of the franchises has, I mean, they have increased so much since we bought the team that it's, I think it's a very smart investment again. But I mean,
if I could just add, you know, we hosted here on Sunday before our final Women's Super League game of the season, our women's team from 1975. And it was incredible to see some of the women who are now in most cases in their 60s and 70s, who were real pioneers at that time of the game. But unfortunately, Brighton lost faith in the women's game in the late 70s and 80s, and just simply couldn't afford to sustain the women's program that we had there. So I think, you know, the point I was making about patience and the point that Sophie's been making about a faith in the brand and the confidence that there will be a return. I think the big difference now is that we all have that faith. We as a club didn't have it 50 years ago. We didn't stick with it. We should have done. But many clubs didn't at that time. But I think this is now a different era. I think there's more confidence. I think there's more credibility. I think there's more professionalism. I think there's more commitment, not just in England or the US, but right the way across Europe as well, and South America and Central America too. So I think we're in a really different era now for the women's game, and I think it's really exciting.
Sure.
No, Sophie, go for it, please. Echo.
No, I think that the leagues have been, have worked in the right direction to give confidence to clubs to make the investment. I mean, we see what the WSL. I mean, I think your plan was rebuild in 27, Paul, if I'm correct. Liga MX is working well. Also, the NWSL is now 10 years old league, which is a kind of record in the US. And so, it gives confidence to clubs that they can invest on something that will last, and they put resources to be sustainable players and impactful players as well. I think everybody has a conscience that the women's game is really beyond the game.
Yeah, and I think that the data is definitely showing us that the player power in women's football is significantly higher than in the men's game, which is obviously a unique attribute that many of the clubs are capitalizing on. You both kind of brought the conversation back to players at some point, whether it's the players within your team or the academy. Just before I ask you some questions on player development and the academies that you have, Sophie, I think in the NWSL you've just signed a new CBA, new collective bargaining agreement for the league. Could you maybe just express a little bit how important that milestone is, not just for the league, but also I think as an example for other women's sports across the world, particularly because it has been published, which is quite a rare thing.
Yeah, I mean, it's been the first CBA of the NWSL, so it's really a milestone in the history of the league. People can think it's late, and probably it's late to have it in the 10th year. It has been the one of the key points to start rebuilding the trust with the players after what happened last year. And so we have dedicated all our energy to get to this agreement with the NWSLPA, and we were both are really happy to announce it just before the preseason, and it was signed at the ACFC opening game like 2 weeks ago. It's a major step because it creates some kind of stability for the next 5 years in terms of labor relationship between the league, the teams, and the players. And you know that on top of on being a closed league, the NWSL has also a salary cap, and so it's a very different model. But having this agreement, I mean, it gives security to players. It creates really a period of 5 years where we can work all together in a trustful relationship to develop the league, which will benefit to everyone. And it was really needed to get to the point where we can work hand in hand and make the most of this relationship. And yes, in the women's game, I think the players are, they have a specific role to play. You know, they are like multidimensional persons. They are brilliant voices, they are brilliant athletes, they are incredible people, human beings. And so we we are a little bit behind them, actually. They are like the drivers of the change of the game, of everything. We're just trying to invest as much as we need to give them the opportunity to shine. So I think this CBA is really a key point.
I saw Paul nodding as you were talking about the players kind of being ahead of the rest of some of the women's football organisations. Paul, have you seen there's been an awful lot of player activism on your side as well? Do they push you to do more?
Yes, I think so. I mean, I think when we first got involved with women's professional football again, there was a real divide between the facilities and the support that we provided to our men's team and the support and facilities we provided to our women's team. And again, I think so much has been said over the years about the quality of the product and the type of football that the women's game produces. But if you don't give the women's teams the facilities and the support that they need to be the best product they can be, it's no surprise that the product isn't as good as it could be. So we're now beginning to see the benefits of supporting the women's teams with the right facilities, the right level of player care, the sorts of things that we put around the men's game for many, many, many decades now. And the players have been at the front and center of that activism, that pressure. I can remember going all the way back to my time with the English FA, working with Hope Powell as the national team coach. And Hope was someone who put huge pressure on us to provide the right facilities for her women's national team, to treat them as equals, to make sure that there wasn't such a divide between the support that was given to the men's and boys teams versus the women and girls teams. So that kind of activism goes back almost a quarter of a century in my own personal experience. And it has taken a long time for the women's game, certainly in England, to catch up with the standards that have been provided to the men's game. And no surprise, the quality of the football that the women's game is now delivering is getting better and better. And so there is a connection between the support and the delivery of the product. And we shouldn't be surprised if in the next 5 to 10 years that product gets even better as women footballers become more accustomed to being full-time professional athletes. The facilities to support those athletes get better. The game itself will get better, faster, more watchable for a wider audience. And with that will come more commercial revenue, more exposure, and then suddenly you'll start to see a return on your financial investment as well as the brand investment. So all of these things are connected. And, in some ways it's a surprise it's taken so long for all of the dots to be joined up because it's not really rocket science.
No, it's not. And speaking of the dots that come together, one of the ones that sometimes here at UEFA we get asked a lot about that's maybe slightly at the side is actually that kind of player recruitment, player development angle in the women's professional game. What is the best way for a leading club to develop talent? Should they be doing it themselves? Should it be left more to grassroots? Because the player pool is much smaller. So Paul, how is your, you've spoken that you have a new facility, one of the first clubs to have like a dedicated facility as well. How are you kind of, what's your focus on player recruitment and player development?
Well, you're right. The pool of players isn't yet large enough. So, we first of all, we want to promote the girls' game at grassroots level and get as many girls playing as soon as we can. And in that regard, we want to support local clubs as best we can to help them to encourage girls to play. Once we've got that broad base at the bottom of the pyramid, then we can start drawing the best talent into our academy system and then using the professional coaches to help develop those players. And then ultimately they progress to the women's first team. But again, we've seen even with our own men's and boys academy, we didn't have an academy here for the boys until a decade ago. And only now we're beginning to see the benefits of investing 10 years ago in the boys academy as some of our players start to make it through to our first team, saving us tens of millions of pounds in transfer fees, and obviously giving a huge amount of credibility to the local football community where a lot of those players have come from and have been developed from. So the same, I think, will happen with the girls. It might take a bit longer simply because the pool isn't so big to start with. But I think it's really important, certainly for a club of our size, that we continue to develop our own talent, because we're not going to be able to compete with big transfer fees for against the biggest women's teams. Wages are a concern. We don't have a salary cap here. We don't have the same kind of collective bargaining agreement that they have in the US. I've worked with that when I was with MLS. It's got positives and also some negatives. But we're very keen to make sure that we support the growth of the game first and foremost, so that we can develop our own talent and hopefully get a great return out of the investment we've made in the buildings and the pitches that we have here, to fund and to fuel our first team for the future.
Yeah, I mean, very much wanting to watch this space, looking towards Brighton and Hove in the next few years in the WSL to see how the fruits of your labour with your player development plan. I did notice your strategy has it really top and central. It's very player focused, which was really, really interesting to see. And actually, incidentally, we don't get to see many women's football club strategies. So congratulations on launching that.
Thank you.
Sophie, just back to you before I then step into maybe a bit of a presenter role and talk a little bit about the Women's Champions League. How are you finding the possibility to develop synergies for player development between Olympique Lyonnais and OL Reign?
We are lucky that OL Reign does have an academy, and the director of the academy is Amy Griffin, former world champion with the U.S. national team in 1991. She's set up a very qualitative program, and we are in the process of analyzing what we can do to leverage on both know-how. We know what we can do in France. We've proved that we can develop top-level players, as I mentioned earlier, and we know also that the model in the US is quite different. We do not have yet a homegrown player rule in the National Women's Soccer League. So it means that all players in the academy would go through the draft process. You cannot sign a player from your academy. And we are still also in a pay-to-play model in our academy in the US. It's not a fully funded academy, which is the case in Lyon. So, the idea is taking the time to analyze and see how we can build paths. Ideally, if we could develop players in France and the US who could play in both teams, yeah, that would be perfect. And if we can create opportunities for players inside our group, like, for example, last year we had 3 players, Eugénie Le Sommer, Jennifer Morrison, and Sarah Brady, who played 6 months with OL Reign. I think it was a fantastic experience for them. So it's part of the corporate strategy to create these opportunities. If it works, if we can make it fine with the rules of both leagues, and so we are working on that. It's a target. It's not a short-term target, but it's a target.
It's part of the long-term vision for the group. You mentioned there 3, huge names in women's football: Bouhadi, Maroujan, and Le Sommer, who are also women's UEFA Women's Champions League winners. So I'm going to use that as a little bit of a segue now, because for the next 2 to 3 minutes, I'm going to step out of this moderator role and quickly present a little bit on the UEFA Women's Champions League. So, Sophie, Paul, you can relax for 2 minutes, but only 2 minutes while I quickly highlight the changes of the Women's Champions League and play a quick video, because it seems a little bit impossible that we can talk about driving the change, at least in European women's football, and not talk about the recent revamp of the UEFA Women's Champions League. This is a competition that started in 2001, and in the last season has taken on a new form, a new sporting and a new commercial form. And there are 5 things really that I would say that you really need to know about the changes to this competition. So first of all, it's got a group stage, which means there's been more matches and more teams than ever. It has new and improved regulations for player protection and for youth development, so linking to that homegrown player rule and also to maternity provisions. It has a dedicated commercial program that has brought in new revenue, which does mean that there are financial rewards for our clubs. And it also means that there's a first solidarity program for all top division clubs in Europe. VAR is part of women's football competitions as a regular feature. And also what's really made a huge difference is that the centralization of those media rights means that there is a new home for the UEFA Women's Champions League, which is DAZN and YouTube. And for the first time, 61 match days are available for free to up to 4 billion people across the world, and also on days where there's no other European football happening. If possible, I think we have a bit of a taster of what that DAZN YouTube partnership looks like. If we can play the VT, and brace yourselves because this video will give you goosebumps.
The more eyes, the more eyes, the more likes. The more likes, the more tweets. More tweets, more fans, and more fans fill more seats. A full house means more noise. More heads getting turned. More cameras, more angles, more pundits, more press. More headlines, more airtime. More billboards, more big time. More sponsors, more shoots, more signature boots. More little shirts and more little leagues. With big dreams of golden gloves and golden balls. Well done, kid. More seeing them winning that. More stay playing, more keep it up. More pitches open, more try it out. More future champs for teams to scout. More inspired to referee. More storytellers help us see. More coaches crafting how we play. More decision makers forge the way. More ball curling, far reaching, near missing, risk taking, net bursting, gravity defying, jaw dropping football. We all rise with more eyes.
It's one of my favorite ever promotional videos. That one, the more eyes, the more we rise. And I think it's quite a good way of summing up quite a lot of the things that both Sophie and Paul have said about this cycle of the growth of the women's game. And we are starting to see the fruits of that labour in women's football. You've seen the record, if you haven't seen actually the record-breaking attendances in Barcelona in the last few weeks, then you must simply have missed it, but it's incredible. The Women's Champions League is now being watched in over 210 countries, with over 14 million people having watched up to date. So I can't talk about the UEFA Women's Champions League without bringing in Olympique Lyonnais, 7-time winners of that competition. Sophie, what does the UEFA Women's Champions League mean to the development of the women's game?
I mean, I think it means a lot. It's a brilliant competition. The new format in 1 year has proven that when you work on the product, you get the reward, even if it's not all the financial reward that you want, but you had 91,000 people 2 times in Barcelona 43,000 in PSG, I don't remember, 24,000 in Lyon, and I think a couple of other games at this level. So people are waiting for that and are ready for that. And for Olympique Lyonnais especially, it has been our reward, actually. You know, we have invested in the game since 2004, and we became famous across the world because our women's team has won 7 times the competition, 5 times in a row, and we've seen them everywhere. And so I think it's the right platform for the best level of the game, of the club game, and it's very attractive for players. I think it's a motivation for all clubs. I guess it's the target for Brighton and all other clubs willing to invest in the game. And I think it's the main motivation for American players to come to play in Europe. Actually, they want to play the Champions League because, you know, the NWSL is a very attractive competition with a very competitive. You don't know who's going to win each game. And by the way, this year it's extra special because the 2 expansion teams are at the top of the leagues after 3 games, which I think never happens. So it's this Champions League. It's the competition that attracts people, and I think it's really part of the transformation of the women's game.
And Paul, do you agree with Sophie? Is it the target? Is it one of your targets in the future?
Well, I think first of all, what OL have achieved is phenomenal, and congratulations, Sophie, to you and your colleagues for all that you've done there. It's certainly aspirational for us and inspirational. I mean, for us, you know, getting into the top 4 in the Women's Super League is our longer-term vision. Being able to compete with Manchester City, Chelsea, Arsenal, probably Manchester United and Tottenham as well now is going to be really tough for us. But we would love to play at some point in the Women's UEFA Champions League and to compete against clubs of the stature of Olympique Lyonnais and so on. So I think Sophie's right. It's truly inspirational. And I think women's players all over the world will want to play in the Champions League at some point in their careers. And it's a great challenge for everyone to reach that level.
No, it's been a brilliant season for sure. 2022 is set to be an even better year yet when we get the Women's Euro in the summer. Quick question for both of you before some final remarks. Paul, who's going to win the Women's Euro?
Well, I've got to say England, haven't I?
Yeah, I probably should too, but I have to remain neutral. Sophie?
Well, are we going to win what? The Euro or the Champions League?
The Euro. The Euro.
Well, I hope so. I think that all teams are preparing as well as they can to be the best.
So, Sophie, what's your final remarks for the day? What's your vision for the women's game in the next, 5 to 10 years?
Well, I believe that there is so much value to get from the women's game that it's really a good investment to do. It's going to be investment driven for a couple of more years, even maybe more. But I think it's more than the right thing to do. It's a fantastic thing to do.
Paul, your closing remarks, vision for the women's game?
Well, I would echo what Sophie has just said. I think it's a really exciting time for women's football, not just in Europe, across the world. And I think this is a great time to invest. I think it's an opportunity to support the growth of the game. And it is absolutely the right thing to do. I would encourage clubs all across the world to get involved and to help grow the game for everyone's benefit.
I think that's an excellent way to end the panel. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you very much for being part of this conversation and giving your insights into the current situation of women's football, but also the future. Sophie, Paul, it's been an absolute privilege to be able to speak to you today. I think we'd better get back and return to the studio. Stay tuned for the rest of the Liga MX Summit.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Decía Megan Rapinoe tras ganar el Campeonato del Mundo 2019 con Estados Unidos y después de todo el revuelo que se causó alrededor de este triunfo, de este bicampeonato de las barras y las estrellas, que sería imposible no aprovechar la marea mediática y el foco que estaban generando para realmente ser un agente de cambio más allá del tema futbolístico, sino también en el aspecto de concientizar en el tema social para generar un espacio visual y visible para el fútbol femenil. Han existido muchas embajadoras a lo largo de los diferentes años, pero quizás del 2019 para acá hemos visto cómo ha evolucionado de manera rápida el fútbol femenil, futbolísticamente hablando, pero también en temas de derechos, en temas de salarios y en temas de difusión. Así que creo que todo eso nos encaminará a observar a las grandes potencias para seguir trabajando en una liga, por ejemplo, como la de México, que también está creciendo de manera espectacular.
Todo tiene techo el fútbol femenil y se nota, ¿verdad? Con esa difusión, diferentes plataformas interesadas en transmitir cada vez más partidos de todo el mundo. ¿Por qué? Por la pasión, la entrega y sobre todo la calidad. Sigamos creando conversación a través de hashtag Summit Liga MX. Hagamos una pausa y regresando tendremos a Gerardo Torrado hablando del Tri en año mundialista. Sencillamente imperdible. Pausa y volvemos.